If we could all stand up to welcome the President of Slovenia, Her Excellency. Thank you. Before we begin, while everybody is still moving, please ensure that your mobile phones are on silent or completely off, if I may kindly ask. Thank you. And if you need some seats, there are still some at the back. Can I give you a few seconds just to settle? Or that's where you want to stand? That's fine. Just a few more seconds for everybody to get where they need to get. I don't want any movement while the President is speaking and while we get on with the very urgent debate. Kindly take your seats, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. My name is Ridi Tlhabi. I am a broadcaster and a moderator from Johannesburg, South Africa, living in Washington, and I don't want to talk about that right now. It's a pleasure to moderate a theme that is so crucial in these turbulent times, reimagining multilateral action in age of crisis and constraint. I just want to link this topic to the panel that I moderated about an hour ago. It was on the Middle East, about prospects for peace. I had a plurality of voices, Palestinian voices, academia, multilateral institutions, aid institutions. And it's very difficult to summarize everything that came out of that conversation. But I can say without a shadow of a doubt that the biggest yearning, the most profound yearning, was for all of us to see international human rights law in action, international humanitarian law in action. After all the politics and the different positions and the different solutions were articulated, we all arrived at a central place. A world where international law is subverted, where international law is weakened, where it is ignored, makes us impoverished, makes us poorer as citizens of the world. And whatever our political positions, it was clear from that panel that we can at least agree and coalesce around a single idea, that international human rights law, international humanitarian law matter because they are our greatest bulwark in times of abuse of power and at times of crisis. So it is with that spirit that I'd like to welcome this afternoon the President of Slovenia, who has been such a gracious host to us all at the Bled Strategic Forum for the last 2 days. And we welcome you here, Your Excellency, an address by President Natasha Pirc-Musa.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It was a working day today. It was a working day yesterday, but I am here with the great honor, great pleasure, because the topics that are going to be debated here are very close to my heart. And this is the reason why I'm here, and this is the reason why you are here, I presume. Distinguished moderator, panelists, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure to honor and welcome you to this special 20th Bled Strategic Forum panel, which focuses on strengthening global cooperation and multilateral responses in today's challenging and constrained world. This panel is also a part of the third Slovenian Humanitarian Forum, the patron of which I am honored to be. I will continue within the broader context of the 30th Slovenian Development Days in mid-October. Ladies and gentlemen, we gather here in a paradox. Humanity has never had more knowledge, more connectivity, or more resources at its disposal. And yet, our humanitarian system, designed to alleviate suffering and uphold human dignity, is reaching a breaking point. Protracted conflicts, climate disasters, forced displacement, pandemics, and economic instability are converging to create an apparently permanent crisis. At the same time, the political will, funding and respect for international law that should underpin humanitarian action are weakening. This is not only a technical challenge, it is also a profound political challenge. Humanitarian assistance, ladies and gentlemen, is not charity. It is not optional. Under international law, it is a legal obligation. Yet every day, in many regions, we see humanitarian access being deliberately obstructed. We see aid being politicized. We see humanitarian workers being targeted and even killed. Civilians are denied the protection they are entitled to. The rules are clear, but violations are met with impunity. If this becomes our new normal, we risk not only a humanitarian collapse, but also the erosion of the very foundations of international law and humanity itself. Slovenia is not prepared to accept this outcome. As a small but principled state, we do not seek to engage in power politics. We advocate defending norms and building alliances around shared values. This is why Slovenia has championed the global initiative to galvanize political commitment to international humanitarian law. In multilateral institutions, we use our voice to remind the world that dignity and legality must never be negotiable. We have convened this forum and organized the panel to address the difficult question of whether the current humanitarian system is fit for purpose. The answer, I believe, is both yes and no. Yes, because the existing humanitarian architecture from the United Nations to the ICRC remains essential. We must protect and strengthen it. But also no, because we cannot simply patch a system that is under unprecedented strain. We must reimagine it. Here, Europe has a role to play. The European Union and its member states provide the largest share of humanitarian funding worldwide. Team Europe is really doing enormously a lot. This is a remarkable achievement. However, the EU must also be the voice of principled humanitarian action, reminding us that solidarity, dignity, and human rights must underpin our responses. Slovenia is proud to contribute to these efforts. We are ready to work closely with the European Commission and all member states to ensure the European Union remains the leading donor and the strongest defender of humanitarian principles. I know these are not easy challenges. However, times of constraint must not lead us down the wrong path. We must resist the temptation to privatize humanitarian assistance and treat it as a commodity subject to market logic or political convenience. Humanitarian aid is a public good. It is rooted in the principles of neutrality, impartiality, and independence. Outsourcing it would cause it to lose its legitimacy. This is why the United Nations system and established humanitarian organizations remain so important. They provide accountability, coordination, and legal framework that private actors can definitely not offer. Within this framework, the private sector can play a vital role through innovation and technology, as well as logistics and financing, of course, to complement and strengthen humanitarian action. However, this can only be achieved in partnership with the multilateral system and with respect for all humanitarian principles that I have mentioned. So what does this reimagined system entail? It means adopting a more anticipatory approach, responding not only after disasters strike, but also in advance. It means being more inclusive and equitable by funding and empowering local responders, who are often the first and most effective actors. It means being more accountable, treating affected communities as partners rather than passive recipients. Finally, it means breaking down silos. Humanitarian aid cannot be separated from climate action, sustainable development, or peace building, nor can it be separated from health. The COVID pandemic has reminded us that health is a humanitarian priority and the foundation of peace and stability. When health systems collapse, societies fracture. Conversely, when health is protected, communities become more resilient and prospects for peace improve. This is why strengthening the link between humanitarian aid and health is so essential. Without health, there can be no human security, and without security, there can be no peace. Today's crisis, as well as those of the past, are interconnected. Our responses must be too. As we approach the 80th anniversary of the United Nations, we should ask ourselves, what does success look like? It cannot be measured in declarations. Rather, success will be measured in saved lives, rebuilt communities, laws upheld, and trust restored on the ground. To me, success will be when breaking the rules of war is no longer tolerated as business as usual. It will be when humanitarian workers can deliver aid without fear. It will be when local actors have the resources and respect they deserve. Success will be when multilateralism is not just an aspiration, but a lived reality. There is no doubt Slovenia cannot achieve this alone. No state in the world can. However, by working together with the institutions represented here today, alongside the courageous humanitarian workers and the affected communities, we can work toward a more resilient, principled, and human-centered humanitarian system. In this time of crisis and constraint, we have two options. We can either lower our ambitions or, ladies and gentlemen, increase our commitment. I stand before you today convinced, of course, that we must do the latter. And normally at the end, I say something, from my heart, which is not written down in my speech. And people normally say that this is the best whenever I speak from my heart. And I would just like to tell you one thing. Being a president is not easy. Being in politics, it's hard. I entered politics as a rookie, as a greenhorn. I was never in politics before. And what it hurts me the most is just to see the 50 shades of gray in politics. Can we not say what's right and what's wrong? I know it sounds black and white, but sometimes in politics we do have to say things in black and white color. And I still do believe, ladies and gentlemen, that there are more good people walking on this planet than bad people. This is why I like being a president. I wish you all the success in your professional lives, and I wish you a good stay in Slovenia. I hope that you feel a bit of a Slovenian soul and heart. Also in Slovenian politics, we have 50 shades of grey. It's not black and white always. But I really do believe, that Slovenia is today on the right side of history. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
President, thank you so much. You said something earlier about Slovenia being a small but a principled state. And I don't know about everyone else, but in the few years I've been coming here, interacting with the Bled team, going around the village, meeting people, I know that politics and life is complex and you can't figure out a society just from 1 or 2 or 3 encounters. But there's something soft. There's a softness that just goes to the heart when I'm here at the Bled Strategic Forum.
You know what it is?
Yeah?
A mixture of German and Balkan mentality.
But President, as we get ready for our next panel, I'm just trying to find the words, my first reaction to your speech. It's that politics is complex. The world is complex. We are facing a plurality of crises. But I wonder whether the willingness to want to do the right thing, that's where we can begin, to want to do the right thing and then journey together towards a solution. So I would like to introduce my esteemed panel in no order of importance, just as I see your name. Please help me welcome the Regional Director for Europe for the World Health Organization, Hans-Henry Klocher. You are sitting. Here's your chair. And also joining you, European Commissioner for Equality, Preparedness and Crisis Management, Haja Lahbib. We are also delighted to welcome Mr. Martin Frick, who's the Director of the World Food Programme Global Office in Berlin. We welcome also the President of the International Committee of the Red Cross, Mariana Spoljarik-Egger. And last but not least, the Director General for Development Cooperation and Humanitarian Aid, Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs, Edwin Skert. I nailed your surname. Thank you very much. So let's start here with Haja Lahbib. I want to talk about international law, that the provision of humanitarian aid and assistance is recognized as a legal obligation. It is quite jarring for us as citizens to see the contestation, the political contestation around humanitarian assistance. It should be the most basic thing in times of tragedy. And I was fascinated, not in a positive way, when I read that there's a global initiative to galvanize political commitment to IHL. And I thought, so we need political commitment. Is that where the problem lies? Is it the politics that is wrong? Let's start there. Problem statement. What is wrong with humanitarian assistance right now in the context of international law?
Well, it's a complex question, but let's say simple. You have to turn on the mic. Yeah. You know, I'm also, as you, President, I will say, out from the political box. I was a journalist for more than 30 years, I think, and I discovered the 50 degrees of shades, and also that what was obvious is not so obvious, and what is right and what is wrong then become completely confused when you jump into politics, unfortunately. The rules, the conventions we all signed after the Second World War are now putting into question, clearly. IHL in focus, is also putting into place since the previous mandate, so we didn't invent right now, to defend international humanitarian law. And what is at stake, by the way, is our common humanity. I'm sure you know the main subject, the main topic here is Gaza, since I'm arrived. And this is also something that is haunting me and should haunting us all, night and day, because there are blatant violations of human rights. But I'm sure if you put this problem to a kids and you say, this is A and this is B, how can we solve that? They will find a solution immediately. But because of this sensitive issue, the passion, and you know, I was Minister of Foreign Affairs before, and I saw so many ministers, very clever, smart, being completely confused and, you know, obviously not sticking to our core values, European core values, Geneva Convention and everything. We have all the tools we need, but we are not able to implement it, unfortunately. The result is the famine that we see in Gaza, a disaster in Sudan, also the difficulties that ICRC is facing nowadays. I was on a mission in many countries where we have to advocate for an impeding access for humanitarian aid, which is, you know, protecting the civilians, women and children that are innocent. We all agree that even when two countries are at war, we need to protect the innocent citizens, but it is not the case anymore. So we want to develop advocacy, of course, IHL in focus. We had also a forum, humanitarian European forum in Brussels. We want to reset also humanitarian aid and so on because of the reducing of the fundings and so on. So, you know, 9 months after the job, I couldn't imagine how difficult it will be to be a commissioner for humanitarian aid. At the beginning, I was so, you know, grateful and so happy because this is also dear to my heart. Because for me, it was neutral. It was being impartial. It was all about solidarity and humanity, values that we all share as a human being. But it's not the case anymore, unfortunately.
Do you think we are reversing on those values?
Clearly, we are
reversing.
Worried about that? Of course, and we should all be worried about that, because how many generations it will take to recover from what we are witnessing in Gaza, but also in Darfur, in Sudan, in Myanmar.
Let me just pivot a bit and bring in the president of the Red Cross here. So if we are declining and reversing in terms of these values and these frameworks, it's very clear that wars and conflict drive humanitarian crises. The rules of war are being violated consistently over and over again. We are seeing unspeakable suffering, not just in Gaza. You mentioned the Sudan as well. We see the DRC as well. We have a planetary crisis that is displacing people as well. You are right in the belly of the beast. You are right in the heart of it. I'd love to hear from the Red Cross's point of view, what are the biggest problems facing access to humanitarian assistance?
Thank you. Before I start, let me just seize the opportunity to thank Slovenia, to thank the President, to allow me to be here, but also for your speech. It's a speech that I would read over and over again, all the time. I really think you said everything that needed to be said, and I also want to thank the Commissioner, the European Union, for their constant support, because it is very important at this time. We live in a decade of war. I think I can say that because I know the statistics. They're confidential, but we know them. We classify conflicts. Since I took office in late 22, we have classified more conflicts than declassified. Today, we classify approximately 130. This is more than in previous decades, much more than in previous decades. And what we see is an increase in international armed conflict. So international armed conflict means conflicts between states, between organized state armies, defense systems. Countries today, and this I can say safely as well, are at war, preparing for war, or affected by war, including European countries. This comes with massive investments in defense, massive spending in defense, often at the detriment not only and not predominantly international cooperation, but at the expense of human development at national levels and investments in local and national infrastructure that is necessary. It coincides with an unimaginable acceleration in the development of new technologies that amplify the force and the negative impact of wars. The massive displacement we see today in the Horn of Africa is unprecedented if you compare it with previous iterations of conflict in the region. The level of destruction, and I go to Gaza, we have 350 staff in Gaza. The level of destruction in Gaza is unprecedented. You look at Syria, it's massive, but Gaza is exceeding even that. We see people being entirely stripped of their human dignity in all possible ways. So what is most problematic at the moment is not the fact that the law is being broken. The fact that law breaks is being broken is inherent in the concept of law. But what is dangerous today is the hollowing out of the law, the dismissiveness of the law, the dismantling of the normative as the underpinning for political action. This is the most dangerous route we are taking at the moment, and we are on a fast track to self-destruction. If you count the wars, if you look at the impact, and if you look at the impossibility soon to find the means to reconstruct, nurturing further instability, but the permissiveness with which wars are being approached, there is victory at all cost, the annihilation of the enemy, that we don't care, or because we can, the might of military power that gives you the feeling that there's nothing that prevents you from pursuing your military objective. That is the most dangerous, because while we are watching and at the same time looking away from what is happening in Gaza and what is happening in parts of Sudan, we are already preparing for the next escalation that will take place somewhere where we won't be able to stem the tide. And I would seize the opportunity of this panel, I can come back to it later, to discuss how we can bring states together to stem the tide before it's too late. And the global initiative is one key effort in this regard.
Mr. Klöcher, let me bring you in here from the World Health Organization side. We have heard and seen, not just in Gaza, but especially in Gaza, the man-made famine, that's what is being talked about, the blocking of aid, and so on. But in the context of international human rights law and humanitarian law, it is very difficult to approach these themes without reflecting on the fragmentation of the multilateral system. When citizens are vulnerable anywhere in the world, they are looking to the law to come and to protect them. They believe that there are organizations like the World Health Organization, WFP, and many other UN agencies that make up this multilateral edifice. We want to believe that at the time that we need you all the most, you will step up. I'd like to hear from you, what are your biggest constraints? But in answering that as well, a question that I'm just thinking of now, can multilateralism survive the moment that you will define in your answer to my first question?
Thank you, Reddy, and thank you, Madam President, and everyone for the invitation here. It's a great honor for me. So, the big issue, the big elephant in the room, speaking as a medical doctor and as a regional director of the WHO, obviously, in this multilateralism cadre, is that the sanctity of the healthcare workers is no longer there. Whether I was working for MSF, Doctors Without Borders, or WHO, right, from Ukraine to Central Asia to the Sahel, It's not anymore going from one crisis to the other. We have to navigate permanent disruption in a climate where the healthcare workers and the patients are directly targeted. For this year only, there are 1,100 patients and doctors, nurses killed, already much more than last year. I think it was the UN Special Rapporteur on Health to Right who, when she was reporting to the Human Rights Council in June, who was telling the conflict zones became no human rights zones. So if you are scaring people to go to the hospital and the doctors where they have to be saved, their life being killed, then we have obviously a huge issue. On the multilateralism, so yes, I mean, I think many of you are acquainted with the UN 80 initiative by the UN Secretary General to make the UN fit for purpose, which Dr. Tedros is mirroring, because in WHO too we're undergoing existential crisis with the US leaving the WHO and other states having to beef up more for defense. So we have to do our own homework, but I would say that we have to think of a way also how to bring the soft power and the hard power more together. Because what I see is that the bargaining space for humanitarian dialogue is really decreasing. So, and there is sometimes a kind of a preset initial dominant narrative that says you are the victim and need the help and you are the perpetrators. And so I will give some example, because I always try to be a little bit optimist. In Haiti, by talking to the gangs in terrible violence, WHO did succeed to massively vaccinate children for cholera. In Gaza, under very life-threatening circumstances, 550,000 children in 2 rounds for polio. In northwest Syria, actually together with ICRC, with support of the EU, across contact lines of the ISIS. So I think we have to think really, not to be seen as the naive humanitarian actor based on principles, which is the starting point. We should stand very strong. And I was very touched by you, Madam President, telling that without health, there is no peace, no security. Absolutely. This is the basis. But at the same time, how do we open up that space to have a humanitarian corridor, right? To allow at least this, what you say already, to answer to the expectations of the people. But definitely this has become very, very complicated.
From the WFP side, same question around the problem statement. What are the biggest challenges? But again, in answering that, there's a concern around food being weaponized, the weaponization of food in times of crisis in Gaza, in the Sudan, and so on. It's worrisome that certain practices are reinforced and reinforced. At the first moment when food was being used as a weapon, it was jarring, it's a shock to the system. But now you hear it every day, and there's a way in which the mind is just normalizing that. And the fear is that if that translates into our political position, that, oh, this is what happens during times of war, we've normalized it. Your thoughts?
Well, thank you very much. I think the President said it very eloquently. It's our very humanity that is at stake. And the acceptance and the respect for humanitarian principles is the inner core of it. Now, food is a very emotional topic, and normally, under normal circumstances, no matter what, you don't wish starvation to your worst enemy, because it's a horrifying thing to starve to death. And we've been seeing, and I just said that in a previous conversation, over the last 20 years really, how the respect for human rights and for international humanitarian law slowly started to get little cracks, and now the unspeakable becomes speakable. And we see, as the colleague from WHO said, not only one specific situation in which it has become extremely difficult for humanitarians to operate, but it has become almost a new normal. When we speak about Gaza, we tend to forget that this is also the deadliest conflict for humanitarian helpers that we have seen since the Second World War. 370 plus alone from the United Nations, over 500 people who work in the humanitarian killed in this conflict. And it's not getting better. And I think where we are is a multiple crunch. It's the lack of respect for humanitarian workers. It's a tendency to more and more interfere with the delivery of aid. But this also compounded by a funding situation that is just very, very difficult, even if it wouldn't be for all of these restrictions. If I compare what we had by Christmas 2019, we had about 135 million people who needed food assistance. Today, these are 340 million people, while at the same time, the World Food Programme has 40% less funding than last year. So it has become difficult. And what I see as so devilish in that is if you, by default, don't have enough food, if you don't have enough funding, then what should be apolitical, the humanitarian help, almost automatically becomes political because you can distribute the food only once. And now we are in a situation where, in the big humanitarian crisis, we are facing staggering access problems, but also in the more silent crisis, we just can't distribute anymore because the funding is not there. And that creates, again, in the countries, a feeling of double standards, which is eroding the trust in the humanitarian system. So I think there is a very serious situation here that needs to be addressed, because in the end it is really about a rules-based and multilateral system that has only the credibility if it's able to address those who are most in need.
We're going to talk about funding in just a moment. That's our second theme. But I do then want to bring you in Mr. Edwin Skirt, Director General for Development Cooperation and Humanitarian Aid, Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs. A landscape analysis from Slovenia's point of view when it comes to humanitarian assistance. What is wrong with the system?
Thank you. An easy question for the beginning. But let me first start by thanking all our partner organizations to participate at this third Slovenian Humanitarian Forum and also at the Bled Strategic Forum. The entire humanitarian system, not only that one of the UN, was largely built on the rebels of after the Second World War. It was quickly adopted then in the 1990s. Geneva Conventions were adopted in the meantime. And now we are, let's say, 35 years later than in 1990s. When we talk about the humanitarian crisis, particularly in Slovenia, we often think about the situation in Gaza, about the situation in Ukraine. But there are so many protracted crises around the globe. And what is different that it was in the 1990s and after the Second World War is that there are many non-state actors, that there are conflicts within the countries, that there are actors that think that Geneva Conventions and international humanitarian law does not apply. And then we have a huge problem in general that there is not enough funding. Of course, you know, when people from the UN or from the ICRC speak to me, they would usually say it is important that you're principled because you're a small state. And we know we can't talk about scale in Slovenia. But I think that they are not doing the right thing when they talk to us and they say that financing is not important. It is. If every single member of the international community would allocate the necessary funds for humanitarian assistance and development cooperation, there would be millions of people more fed. We have 300 million people that need humanitarian assistance. Maybe we could assist 100 million. So funding is important. And when we speak about funding, we have to take into consideration the changed world. And these changed worlds have different powers or different composition of power than in 1990s when the humanitarian system was adopted for the last time. So there are other actors that can contribute financially, that they can be loud when we talk about the respect of international humanitarian law, and the system should adopt to kind of embrace these new actors as supporters of IHL, of humanitarian principles, and as providers of humanitarian assistance, of humanitarian funds.
All right, so you've gone to the heart of the matter, underfunding. But I'm sitting here thinking, okay, there could be chronic underfunding because there's simply no resources, there's a competition for scarce resources, humanitarian needs are just growing exponentially. Or it could be underfunding because states that are legally bound to finance humanitarian action are deliberately falling short. So that's the second thing I'm saying on this topic. The third thing I'm saying is that there could be underfunding because there is a weaponization again of funding, paying for some crises while ignoring others. Your thoughts on the implications of this era of chronic underfunding, and I want to comment from all of you on this one because it is central to your operations. Let's start with you.
I will start by saying that the European Union will stay a reliable and predictable and principled partner. We are becoming, thanks to the US, the first global actor with 6 billion euros per year, which represent 40% of the humanitarian aid in total. It's a huge responsibility considering the budget, the money, but also politically. And it's important to find also new ways to work more efficiently. That's why we hold this European Humanitarian Forum a few months ago in Brussels, where we gather more than 5,000 NGOs to find ways, and we know the ways. Never waste a good crisis, we said. And we know that by implementing what we call the nexus, the so-called nexus, peace, cooperation, development, we can save money. By also working on localization, putting the humanitarian aid closer to those who need it, we can spare money. We are going also to increase the localization from 11% to 22% by next year. So it's doubling our localization. It's allow us also to bring, more responsibility, to shift the power in a less, I will say, allow me to say, colonialism manner or paternalist manner. It's not us, I was very astonished to discover, for instance, in Adre, near the Sudanese border with Chad, that the flowers that I was discovering there and distributed was coming from France, from USA, from Western countries. But, to bring all this humanitarian aid, all this food has a cost. So we need to be more local. And I discovered a fabulous project by the WFP in the Rohingya camp in Bangladesh, where you brought the hosting communities, you allowed them to sell vegetables through the World Food Program to refugees, the Rohingya refugees. So it's a circular economy. And hopefully, after a couple of years, there will be more independence, more autonomies. And this is also a more dignified manner to help them. So we need to work in a more efficient manner. We need to spare money. And also we need to stay principled. Okay. This is very important.
So I'm just thinking about what was in the President's speech about humanitarian assistance not being a charity, and it sounds as if you're talking about a systems transformation and empowering local communities as well. I must get an answer from the Red Cross around the non-compliance with the financial obligations. But do we need to then rethink compliance then, not only voluntary pledges, but through enforceable obligations and penalties for non-compliance with IHL and human rights law when it comes to funding as well?
I have to refer to my 3 years at the ICSC again. During this time, since the early 2023, we have cut close to 5,000 positions. We'll have soon in the coming weeks. We reduced the budget by 1/3, by almost 1 billion, due to the constraints. But I still don't want to be distracted by funding with regards to what we need to do to stem the tide. The world is printing money as if there were no tomorrow. We are looking at the global debt crisis. We are looking at levels of destruction that are, disregarding all the guardrails that were put in place after the Second World War to prevent that massive level of loss, human loss, material loss, from happening again. But we are allowing it to potentially happen again. We have to continue supporting the humanitarian assistance because it's an impartial, neutral way of providing assistance that is not commercialized but also not serving military objectives and reinforcing the negative impact of war. But what we have to do, first and foremost, is to prevent the tide from submerging the whole world with something that we will not be able to reverse if we don't do it now. When I spoke at the Security Council a year ago under the Slovenian presidency on leadership for peace, I said something that I've been repeating since. Denouncing your enemy for breaking the law in public may be useful for your political constituency and your political objectives, but for us humanitarians, it doesn't make a difference. What makes a difference is if states who have an influence call their allies and tell them to stop, if they use their political, military, and financial economic powers to bring their allies to a better respect for the rules of war. That's preventing the humanitarian fallout from happening in the first place. We have to acknowledge that international humanitarian law is as effective as the political will that states are prepared to put behind it. And only compliance with the rules of war will reduce the humanitarian pressures and the humanitarian cost, because we are far beyond what any state can absorb anymore, including the United States, even if they came back at the levels where they were before. And the European Union cannot compensate for it, no matter how hard you try, and you are very generous already, but your taxpayers cannot be overexploited either. So we have to stem the tide. This international initiative, the Global IHL Initiative, is built on a joint statement by 6 states: France, Brazil, China, Kazakhstan, Jordan, South Africa. These 6 states came together with the ICSC last September to call on all states to join a political movement to reaffirm their commitment to a more protective interpretation of the rules of war, to an adjustment of military strategies, to an implementation of these rules at national levels to be prepared for war, to contain the negative fallouts that we see at the moment, because we know that we would not see the end of a near-peer confrontation in the Asia-Pacific or any part of the world if it were to happen. 25 states took the lead over organizing consultations on the interpretations of the rules of war and formulating recommendations. Slovenia is one of the 25 countries. 130 countries have participated in consultations so far. First findings will be published in October in view of an international meeting next year. These first findings show already that the majority of states want a more protective, less permissive interpretation of the rules of war. But that means states will have to budget for implementation of IHL. They have to train their forces, they have to review their military strategies, they can work with us in preparing the military exercises. It's very concrete. We need the defense ministers on board for this. It's about protecting civilian infrastructure. It's about new tech in war. It's about naval warfare. It's about protecting health systems. These work streams exist, the platforms exist, but it's also about making the link between the rules of war, respect for the rules of war, and promoting peace. We have to galvanize political commitment, and states have to make the Geneva Conventions and their implementation at home, in peacetime, a political priority, and they have to budget for it. This is the only way we can, in the long term, mitigate the humanitarian pressures, including on us as humanitarian workers.
Right. From the WHO point of view, I mean, I'm sitting here just feeling sorry for WFP, WHO, Red Cross, because you're not political players. You're non-political. You've got to keep humanitarian assistance neutral. You've got to be there where you are needed the most, and yet you have to navigate a deeply politicized multilateral system. I know my theme was around spending and budgets. They're still relevant to where I'm going, but I'm thinking you've got to reset, right? One of the themes of this conversation is humanitarian reset. I wonder for the WHO, what does it mean with this reality in front of us? What innovations are you thinking of in monitoring and verifying that could strengthen compliance with protection of medical missions in this kind of constrained space? What latitude are you identifying for yourselves as you have to complete your mission despite the politics?
So I would say that, of course, everyone knows WHO is not military, we're not a court, we are technical and moral. So we have to execute that role with courage and precision. So silence is not neutrality. The first thing is, I would say, that we bear witness with evidence. We're the only ones who have a surveillance system for attacks on healthcare. And in many settings, be it in Ukraine, in Gaza, in the Syrian Arab Republic, this is the only independent source, really, of these attacks, is number one. Number two is to speak truth to power, what Dr. Tedros and me have been doing consistently, be it Gaza, Israel, Ukraine, Russia, and that's why I would like to come back to the paramount importance of humanitarian dialogue with all sides, but in a smart way. The third one, of course, and we're doing a lot there with ICRC and MSF, is to try to protect, of course, our workforce, but also, like we're doing in Ukraine, the health facilities, be it masking locations or underground or pre-deployment. So this is key. And then, of course, we're not a court, but we're collaborating with evidence with those institutions who have this mandate, be it the International Criminal Court or whatever. Now, on the financing, I think for WHO and UN, this is a healthy exercise, the soul-searching after 80 years. And I have a special initiative at the start of my 5-year mandate on addressing violence against girls and women, which is a terrible thing, and thank you, Commissioner, for really your support. If you look what UNFPA is doing, what UN Women is doing, what WHO is doing, I mean, there is definitely a lot, if we're brutally honest, a lot of possibility to really go back to the core mandate and stop mandate creep. But for me, it's not about financing WHO. It's about financing the international aid. We have philanthropic organizations, right? Some who are working in countries with a bigger economy than the country itself. I'm living in one, by the way, in Denmark. Of course, they have to be governed by the state, right? The control, but there's a lot of possibility. Banks, a lot of money. But my goodness, I mean, the people to reprogram, to fill in the forms, it takes easily 6 months in a crisis, so they need to have more risk appetite. The third one, of course, is domestic financing as well, which is there. So I think that maybe even more than a lack of funding, is that after the COVID and with the wars, countries have less appetite to finance aid, but they're putting national interest above global solidarity, which means security, stability, and defense. So that, I think we have to be, maybe the final point what you told, Madam President, I can only agree is, and to the Commissioner, on local empowerment. I have been 5 years in Myanmar between 2004 and 2009 under the military junta, and we had Cyclone Nargis. Saturday morning, 4 hours, 120,000 people died, all those my own daughters as well. It took months before the international humanitarian aid could really go to the river sites, and the same for post-earthquake Turkey. So it's expensive humanitarian aid which actually reaches a small portion of the people. In Myanmar, it were the ladies in red, we call them, the midwives, living there with the red robes. So it's happening. In Bangladesh, the monsoons, the people are educated on early warning. So to empower them is a good thing for everything, including economies of scale.
WFP, same, you started the conversation around funding. I'd like you to expand on that, but most importantly, enforcing the rules so that there is compliance at every level.
Well, the second one is an easy one because WFP is entirely voluntarily financed, which is we are depending on the gratitude of countries. We cannot force countries to contribute. We can only note the generosity, and this is a very good moment to say thank you to Slovenia, because the contribution from Slovenia, despite being a small country, went up in an exemplary way. And I'm using the example of Slovenia if I talk to other governments, no naming here, as a shining example. But I think we heard several of the aspects that are really, really interesting. About innovation, about making the most of the money, and the Commissioner mentioned the example. When we talk about food aid, people still believe that, this is the classic box with food that you are handing over to a family that is starving. This is the case, and sometimes you cannot do otherwise. But more and more, we can deliver cash, and with digital technology, we can really, with pinpoint accuracy, find the single mother with 4 kids. We can find the elderly people who don't make their way to a distribution center. And cash has the wonderful ability to be recycled again and again and again. And I have seen that in refugee camps when you don't give food to a family, but you give a little bit of cash. You see 2 wonderful things happening. One is local businesses start to flourish, and we are trying to support that, but also trying to support farming ladies to start a production, to have an income. And what you also see, and I find that so heartwarming, and it's countering any populism that you hear all too often, is how responsible the families really are with the money. And then there's a little bit of saving, and maybe you buy a book for school, and you do all of that. It sounds simple. It was not possible 20 years ago with the digital tools. You can do that. Yeah. And the second example, very rapidly, the President mentioned it. We have 60% of our food situations triggered by war and conflict, absolutely, and we spoke about that. But there is also a cost crisis, and there is the ever-increasing impact of climate change. And here, anticipatory action, basically using modern forecast systems, using the fact that even the poorest people have digital devices to tell them, A, there's a situation coming, and B, distributing a little bit of cash so people can take their family and can take often their animals when they are farming and put those in security already helps reducing the impact of a disaster tremendously and helps us spending less money and more targeted with the effect that we want to achieve, which is protecting the local population.
All right. I do want to allow 1 or 2 questions from the floor, but let me just very quickly from Slovenia. We've heard just now that you are a donor government in the EU despite your size, and I think we need to stop talking about your size because the magnitude of your reach is huge. And I'm just thinking maybe there's an unfairness that if you are a small nation and you are increasing your contribution and everybody else is getting away with it, or it's a positive soft power tool that can be used to put pressure on major powers to comply, something that we in our country call name and shame. I know this is a diplomacy conference. You don't want to shame anybody, but you want to call a spade a spade. Is there a way that we can use your leadership, as it were, in this field to just galvanize more action by major powers?
I agree that our power lies in our principled approach in the UN, in the Security Council, in all multilateral settings. It's not the funding, but when I mentioned the funding, after Martin spoke about it, I mentioned it because it is also important. It is important that you demonstrate that you can walk the talk. But of course, what we could do is just look at us. Look at Slovenia in the Security Council when we talk about humanitarian access, about respect of IHL, all the principles about the support to the Geneva Conventions, about all the initiatives and the stakes out. So this is important. That's why also our leaders, they always speak about the principled foreign policy. And when we talk about rules, about international law, we talk about principles. So we are pragmatic when we come that we have to choose which UN agencies we are going to finance, where to prioritize our official development assistance to make it more efficient, how as a small donor we could bring us to more localization, because without localization this will only be a lip service. And if we don't empower the communities, we won't achieve that much as we would, only with the existing humanitarian infrastructure. But empowering local communities, so doing localization properly, it doesn't mean subcontracting them. I think we would have to bring their voices to the table, their decision makers. The case that Hans mentioned earlier would not happen if there would be enough funds, if local communities would be equipped for anticipatory action, so that when they would see the drought coming, that they would be ready to prepare for that drought that is coming. So this is why localization is so important. We try to do it with our limited funds through our excellent NGOs that we have in Slovenia that are tasked to empower local NGOs in our partner countries. And of course, we try to focus as much as possible to work with a limited number of international organizations. And of course, we always lend our voice when we talk about the principle of humanitarian principles and of IHL and in general international law.
Okay, I'm going to be like a headmistress. I'm going to be so strict. No speeches. No speeches. Your question, very brief, very succinct, or a comment. You may just want to react to something that you've heard. When you see me standing up, it means you must wind down. When you see me standing here, you are in big trouble. Let's go.
Can I stand? Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gulet Ibrahim. I'm actually from Somalia, Security Council of the UN. So I had a quick question. You mentioned localization, and I think there was a theme going among the panelists. How can development and humanitarian can be tied together? Because I feel like if you're going to localize to improve the lives of people, maybe seeing humanitarian through the lens of development, because if instead of seeing through the lens of charity. And I think my question is, how can we improve the nexus between humanitarian and development? Thank you.
I'm proud of you. Great, short. Who's going to answer that one? Anybody can go there. The EU, Commissioner?
We have a very good example in Afghanistan and many other countries where we've been able to implement very successfully the nexus, because it is clear that humanitarian aid is just an answer, response in emergencies. But to recover in a more, to help the countries to recover and to, in a sustainable manner, we need cooperation and development. We need education, we need circular economy, and so on. So it starts with cash, it starts with localization, with employment, with a lot of things that we put all together to allow civil society to walk on their own feet.
Okay, second question. Who has a question or a comment? Quick. No? There, at the back. Okay. Sorry. Remember, short and sharp. No pressure.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much. Stefan Cibian from the Făgăraș Research Institute in Romania and a Global Diplomacy Lab member. I know the discussion mainly focused on soft power in a sense, but I think the consequences that we are seeing today come from hard power working differently. So when states withdraw from organizations and withdraw their budgets and take over territories of other countries, this is already quite significant for the current multilateral system, which probably indicates that this system is not going to be around for long. So, sorry for being a bit long, but the question is, if this multilateral system collapses, which it seems to do, what are we doing? Thank you.
Do you want to answer that? Because I know we spoke about it off the panel about, yeah.
It can't collapse. We shouldn't give up. It's the responsibility of each and every state. Don't forget, the majority of states are small to medium-sized. The majority of states are middle income. The majority of people are not rich and mighty. The law, the multilateral system, the organizations like the UN and the ICRC were created to protect the weaker, not the stronger. But they are the majority. We have a huge responsibility. The more we talk about the multilateral system collapsing, the more we talk about IHL collapsing, the more we accelerate the process. Let's talk about how we prevent that. And I count on all states to be at the table next year and to declare their political commitment and to say exactly what they are going to do to stop that trend and to reverse it. We have no other chance.
Can I just be hard on you on that one for just a moment? That sometimes the belief that the multilateral system is collapsing and international human rights law doesn't matter or it's applied unevenly and unequally. It stems from inconsistency in political leadership. You articulated clearly how you see an equitable world, a fair world. So not you personally, but the EU, that you are firm and vociferous in calling for compliance with international human rights law on Ukraine, for example, being quite emphatic in denouncing Russia's aggression. But when it comes to Gaza and Israel, Israel can just run roughshod over everyone else. And I'm South African, so you know where I stand on this, just to put it out there. The inconsistency.
Yeah, but, I was previously Minister of Foreign Affairs from Belgium. I was supportive of the action undertaken by your government and by supporting the ICJ. And so this is a way to support the multilateralism. Now, when it comes to the European Union, you know that for being able to take any action, when it comes to the external action, we need to reach the QMV maturity, which means 15 member states representing 65% of the population. And for that, we need the big countries on board. Germany, Italy, France, of course, and so on. So in the numbers, now we are quite moving with more and more member states being more vocal when it comes to taking measure and sanctions. Because the problem is not humanitarian aid. We all agree that we want to see humanitarian aid reaching population, reaching the Palestinians, unimpeded access, and so on and so on. It's okay. But then, when it's not respected, what can we do? What leverage do we have? We have leverage, but for activate this. So that's why I said this: we are not facing a humanitarian crisis of the system. It's a political crisis.
A crisis of morality.
Of morality and a lack of political will.
Very quickly, closing argument. I'm going all over the show. The clock is ticking. Let's start here.
I take an example with the President. I speak from my heart. I think when we are speaking about humanitarian aid, we often look from the perspective of what does that do to the beneficiaries. It also does something to us, and I think as Europeans, and maybe I might speak as a European, it also defines who we are and how we want to be and what we want to stand for. And in all this populist debate, we must not forget that this is a core issue of humanity.
Mr. Klöcher, your closing comment.
Thank you. If we allow hospitals to be a target, whatever the humanitarian system is financed, it will not work.
Okay. From the Red Cross, closing thoughts.
I join hands with the President. You know, our chances of survival are best in peace. So at the core, the human is good, and this is something we need to work for. Thank you.
Closing comments from you.
Let's the P5 countries recommit to IHL politically. Let's the rest stand united into IHL. That's politically, and practically it would be great if mothers in Gaza and Ukraine would be able to feed their children without being afraid there will be no food tomorrow.
And my closing argument, you've been a phenomenal audience. Thank you so very much. Thank you. Thank you. We did great with time. Let's give ourselves a round of applause as well. Yes.
Thank you.